This week has been a bit of a roller coaster in terms of manufacturing and energy. On the one hand, you have the situation in Libya, where Western air power has now shut the country off from global energy markets as part of what is turning into a political effort to get rid of the Gaddafi regime. On the other hand, we're seeing the impacts of the March 11 earthquake in Japan having a major impact on a number of markets ranging from energy to automotive to telecommunications. Let's start in Libya. At its peak, Libya exported about 1.6 million barrels per day of oil and oil products. Most of that is low sulfur, light sweet crude. This is the sort of crude oil that can't be easily replaced anywhere else in the world. And while during the protests and the fighting that followed, there was still a trickle of oil coming out of the country to people who were brave enough to risk going into the conflict zone, now that US, French, British, Danish, and other forces are enforcing basically a military blockade, all of that is stopped. This is going to remain the state of affairs for the foreseeable future. The Europeans have openly stated that the primary purpose of this operation is to oust the Gaddafi government, and so until that is done, or until they back down considerably, it's safe to assume that all Libyan energy output is going to be offline for at least the next few months. There is one bright spot, however. There are no signs at present that anyone on any side of this conflict has any interest in disrupting the actual infrastructure. So while oil shortages are certainly the issue of the day and prices have gone up, so long as there aren't black columns of greasy smoke rising up out of the desert, this isn't the sort of scorched earth battle that we saw in Kuwait in 1991. The timing of all this, of course, though, is very bad in terms of the global economy. In Japan, we've had a major earthquake that has taken roughly a dozen gigawatts of nuclear power generation offline. That's forced the Japanese to spin up spare capacity at their oil, natural gas, and other sorts of power generation facilities. This is going to increase their demand by roughly 500,000 barrels per day of crude. So roughly 1.6 million offline in Libya, increased demand of about 500,000 in Japan. The real implications for the global economy, however, aren't so much directly related to energy, but are because of the Japanese quake. Japan's population isn't on a thin coastal strip like some countries or in a big flat area. Instead, it's secluded in a series of small coastal enclaves, of which the Tokyo area is by far the largest. What this means is that each enclave has, for all practical purposes, its own local power grid, and interconnections between the various grids are extraordinarily weak. So Tokyo can't import power from areas to the west and the south of it very effectively. They do have a considerable spare capacity. They are bringing that online, but so far, 2 weeks after the quake, it simply has not been sufficient to bring the country back to full capacity. And so the greater Tokyo area, at normal peak demand, needs about 45 gigawatts of generating capacity. Right now, they're only getting about 33. So the greater Tokyo area is looking at prolonged rotating blackouts, perhaps lasting through the end of April or even into early May. That means that one of the world's most dynamic economic regions is at least partially offline. And while some manufacturing can certainly restart, perhaps even the majority, some of the more sophisticated sorts of electronic operations simply can't be done unless the facilities have full electricity all day, every day. It's difficult to come up with some sort of supply chain that is heavily dependent on computers and electronics that does not intersect the Tokyo area in some way. Reduced output, maybe even halted output from a handful of industries is certainly going to have a global impact in the automotive sectors, telecommunications, and computers, just to name a few.